You know, this is such a wondrous time of the year, this Easter season, and we find ourselves illuminated by the light of Christ. That's why you always find the Paschal candle in the sanctuary when we have these celebrations from now till Pentecost. And the gospel reading is usually very rich during this period of time as we just give thought to just what the resurrection means in our lives. Now, for those of you who might have had the opportunity because you were traveling to maybe attend an Easter celebration of the Eucharist in the afternoon, today's gospel is the gospel you would have heard. This story about Jesus encountering these men on the road in the afternoon. And, you know, I love that gospel. Maybe many of you enjoy that too, that gospel from Luke. But there's always something I wondered about. I mean, hey, the gospel writer was talking about how Jerusalem and Emmaus are 7 miles apart. It's a hot afternoon on a dusty road. Must have taken the better part of the afternoon, right? Maybe a couple hours, 2.5, 3 hours to walk that. I always wondered why those two disciples couldn't recognize Jesus. You know? It's just one of those things. I'm thinking, are they blind? I mean, I've got very thick glasses, but I might be able to recognize Jesus, I hope. But then again, you know, there are things that happen, you know, where you don't always see things in front of you. I mean, I remember years ago when I first got out of college, I was working in New York. I went with some friends, went to see a Stephen King movie on a Friday night. And I'll tell you, that movie spooked me so much that I walked 3 blocks past my subway entrance before I realized that I had gone that far out of my way. The movie just kind of got me going there. You know, so certainly you can be maybe a little bit frightened or a little bit off, and you don't always recognize things. No, but sometimes things happen in your life that clouds your vision a bit. I've been a priest for 32 years in our diocese, and I've spent about 2/3 of that time in parish communities where we've had a school. And I remember one year, we were near the end of the school year, it was June-ish, and there was a gathering on a Friday night where the teachers and the parents and the kids were just having a little bit of a going away party for the summer. And a lot of people were all saying goodbye to each other because they're going away for the summer. But this one family seemed to be saying more than just goodbye for the summer. It's like they were going by. They were leaving altogether. And so I kind of hung out by the doorway, and Tom and Dolores kind of came by. They had tears in their eyes, and we were talking a little bit. And they were telling me then that, you know, they can't come back with the kids in the fall, the 3 kids. And we started talking about it. You know, Tom at work, there were some reverses at work, and let's say they lost some contracts, and it would involve some belt tightening by the employees, which in turn translates into belt tightening by the families. And so one of the things they thought about was, we can't bring the kids back. So Tom and Dolores and I took a little walk down the hall of the school and just kind of chatted a little bit. And the kids were there in the fall. We find ways to help make things happen. You know, it's your diocesan appeal money at work, things like that. But as it turned out, by the time November came around, you know, things had gotten better, and life was more secure for the families. And so everything was just smiles and roses again, and that was great. But at that time, I mean, their vision was such that they just couldn't see the possible opportunities that might be available. Could they come and get some help for them and for their kids? Sometimes things like this happen. Maybe you know situations from your family, from local school, the community, work, things that happen, you know, health, having to move, things like that just come up, and you feel really pretty emptied by that. And you know, I think that's what was going on with these 2 disciples. They were not part of the remaining 11. Of course, Judas is not in the picture. They're not part of the remaining 11. But remember in Matthew they talked about commissioning another 72. I wonder if those 2 were from that ring of the next 72. And you know, they're walking back to Emmaus, and their hope is gone. Jesus has died. The disciple, let's say, the original disciples are in hiding. And now they hear that Jesus' body is not where it should be. They are without hope. They are leaving. They're not going back to Jerusalem, I imagine. And so they encountered Jesus on the road. And no need to recapitulate the gospel. You were listening. But there's very much a sense that Jesus gave them something at the end of the gospel. They ran back to Jerusalem to tell the disciples that yes, he is risen. We have seen him in the breaking of the bread, which, you know, that phrase which means so much for us for our celebration at the table here, this holy table, this holy altar, means a lot. Their hope has been restored. And I think that's something for us to consider in this Easter season as one of the things that we can take on as we begin to think more and more about what does the resurrection mean for all of us. We encounter in the Gospels that Jesus who was born in Bethlehem, who lived, who died, who lives, who's risen. And he's risen, he's living again. But in the midst of all those things, we also know this is the Jesus who, say, met with the woman at the well and talked about faith, restored sight to the blind man, gave hearing back to the deaf, healed the leper, raised the dead. Jesus did so many things in the pages of the Gospels. He is risen. Look at all he raised up along the way. How about us? Can we be people who take on Jesus' raising for others? I mean, we respond to the hungry. We respond to the sick. We respond to the lonely and the alienated. We respond to so many in need. Can we take on raising others' hopes too? Just as Jesus raised the hopes, restored the hopes of those two disciples who came back to the fold, what can we do for one another to be attentive to family, neighbors, friends, someone who might be, we don't know at all, but someone who might be like a stranger at the gas station, at a grocery store? What can we do to be people who, like Jesus, bear hope for the world? All these things we do. Now, I must confess, this sounds like it involves a lot of personal contact and work, and it does. And you're thinking, this is the modern world. We have so many things going on. How do I have time for just doing one more thing like this? I think you do. I know I do. Why? Jesus is our model. Because he doesn't always suggest that we do things the way the world does them. I mean, let's think about it a second. Jesus is raised from the dead. This gospel set in that afternoon on the road to Emmaus. Now, if you want to hear things, I'm old enough to remember that I would get a newspaper or listen to the radio or watch the news on television. That's a way to get messages out quickly, just read them or watch them or listen to them. And today, you kind of take your phone or your computer, you kind of tap in a few things and hey, you got the world at your fingertips. That changes. But we know that like this mass communication, mass marketing, it penetrates everywhere in an instant. So what's Jesus doing on the day he is risen from the dead? Maybe the most consequential day in Christian history, in the world's history. What's he doing to get the message out? He's walking down a dusty road with two guys. I mean, is that the way to get the word out in a hurry? I don't think so. Now, we can learn a lot from the ways of the world to use them to help be good Christians and share the message of Jesus. But maybe at its heart, and something Pope Francis talks about a lot about, is that we are called to be people of encounter. And can we think a little bit, say, about this message today on the road to Emmaus? How do we encounter those around us? Do we have hearts that listen? Do we have time? In a world where everything seems to run quickly, can we lose track of time for a little while and just be present to one another? To feed, to heal, to forgive, to reconcile, to help people start over, start with. God, we hope someone would do that for us if we were walking those dusty roads by ourselves. Can we do it for one another? Indeed, let us rejoice and be glad. The Easter season is filled with great wonders and glories for us to share. Alleluia, he is risen. And Jesus shows us something about how we raise one another in faith and hope.